It was a calm afternoon at a small-town gas station, the kind of place where people stop for a quick refill and a cup of coffee before continuing on their way. A lone veteran, wearing a faded leather jacket adorned with a few old military patches, pulled up in his truck. He moved with a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from years of discipline and experience. He wasn't looking for trouble, just a full tank and some peace. But trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding him. As he stood by his truck, pumping gas, the low rumble of motorcycles grew louder. A group of bikers rolled in, their flashy rides and loud laughs grabbing everyone's attention. They parked their bikes in a rough line, taking up more space than needed, their swagger suggesting they were used to owning every place they rolled into. Most people at the station kept their distance, sensing the tension in the air. The veteran didn't flinch. He finished pumping gas, his focus unwavering. But one of the bikers, a towering figure with a leather vest and a cocky grin, decided to target him. "Hey, old man," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. The others chuckled, their voices echoing in the parking lot. "That's a nice truck. Maybe you should leave it to someone who can actually drive it." The veteran turned slowly, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "Just trying to mind my own business," he said evenly. But the bikers weren't about to let it go. They started circling closer, their taunts growing louder. What they didn't know, however, was that this wasn't just any man standing before them. This was someone who had faced far greater challenges than a few bikers at a gas station, and he wasn't about to back down. The veteran's steady gaze didn't waver as the bikers closed in, their laughter ringing through the air like a challenge. He didn't look afraid, but there was a weight in his silence that seemed to unsettle the crowd watching from a distance. For a moment, the gas station felt frozen, like everyone was holding their breath to see what would happen next. One of the bikers, a wiry guy with tattoos creeping up his neck, swaggered forward, tapping the veteran's truck with a finger. "Nice ride," he sneered, his tone full of mockery. "Bet you keep it shiny just for us to take it for a spin." The veteran took a slow step forward, his boots crunching softly on the pavement. He wasn't a big man, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made him seem larger. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said, his voice calm but firm, a quiet warning hidden in his words. The bikers exchanged glances, some grinning like they'd just been handed a challenge. "Oh yeah," the leader said, stepping up beside his friend. "What are you gonna do about it, old man?" The veteran didn't answer right away. Instead, he let his eyes sweep over the group, taking in their tattoos, their gear, the way they stood. He was calculating, assessing, but he wasn't looking for a fight. Not yet, anyway. What the bikers didn't realize was that this wasn't his first encounter with a pack of overconfident tough guys. The patches on his jacket weren't just for show, they told a story of battles fought and lessons learned. And while he wasn't one to brag, he knew how to handle himself when pushed too far. But the bikers kept pressing, their voices growing louder, their movements more aggressive. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to learn a lesson they wouldn't forget. The air seemed to thicken as the bikers tightened their circle around the veteran. Some onlookers edged toward their cars, unwilling to get involved but unable to look away. A nervous energy rippled through the crowd, everyone silently wondering if this quiet man in his worn jacket could hold his ground against the rowdy group. The leader of the bikers, clearly enjoying the attention, leaned in closer. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue," he said with a smirk, reaching out to tap the brim of the veteran's cap. The veteran didn't flinch, but his hand moved just slightly, resting on the tailgate of his truck. His expression stayed calm, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a flicker of something steely and unyielding. "I told you," he said evenly, his voice cutting through the noise. "I don't want any trouble, but if you keep pushing, you're gonna find it." The leader laughed, but his amusement wasn't echoed by all. One of the younger bikers, a scrappy kid who looked out of place among the others, shifted uncomfortably. He glanced between the veteran and his friends, sensing something the others didn't. "Maybe we should just let it go," he muttered, earning a sharp glare from the leader. "Let it go," the leader barked, his tone mocking. "What's he gonna do, huh? This guy's ancient." But the veteran's silence wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a man who had seen and endured far worse. He let them laugh, let them jeer, but he never once backed down. He didn't need to boast or raise his voice. His presence alone was enough to make even the loudest biker question their confidence. As the tension mounted, the scene grew more charged. The veteran's calm patience was unsettling to the bikers, a stark contrast to their bluster. The crowd watched with bated breath, knowing something was about to break, but no one could predict how it would end. The air was electric now, thick with unspoken challenges. The leader of the bikers stepped even closer, a smug grin plastered across his face. "You're pretty brave for someone standing alone," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. His friends chuckled, some revving their bikes as if to punctuate his words. The veteran still didn't move. His hand remained steady on the truck's tailgate, his eyes locked on the leader. "Alone," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the laughter falter. "I've never been alone a day in my life." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed the leader's face, but it was quickly masked by bravado. "Is that right?" he shot back. "Well, looks like nobody's here to back you up now." The veteran tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You'd be surprised who's got my back," he said, his tone low but deliberate, the kind of voice that commanded attention. The uneasy biker from before shifted again, his gaze darting between his leader and the veteran. Something about the older man's composure was starting to get to him, making him second-guess this whole encounter. "Maybe we should just fill up and go," he muttered under his breath, but the leader ignored him, too caught up in his own need to prove something. The veteran's calm was unnerving. The bikers were used to people backing down, cowering under their intimidation. But this man stood his ground, unflinching, as though he could see right through them. A tense silence fell, broken only by the faint hum of gas pumps and the occasional shuffle of feet. The crowd was still, their eyes glued to the unfolding standoff. Every second felt heavier than the last, like the entire scene was balanced on the edge of a knife. And then, with a single deliberate step, the veteran moved, just enough to signal that he wasn't waiting any longer. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear the balance was about to shift. The veteran's subtle movement was like a spark in a room filled with gasoline. The leader of the bikers narrowed his eyes, taking the step as a challenge. "Oh, you think you're tough," he barked, puffing out his chest as his friends cheered him on. The uneasiness that had started to ripple through a few of the group was buried beneath the leader's arrogance. The veteran, still calm and composed, let out a quiet breath. "I'm not here to prove anything," he said, his voice measured. "But if you're set on finding out the hard way, I'm not stopping you." Before the leader could respond, a sudden noise cut through the tension, a sharp whistle from across the parking lot. Heads turned as a second truck pulled up, a dust-covered pickup with a massive American flag flying from the bed. A man about the veteran's age stepped out, followed by another. Both wore jackets similar to the veterans, their patches and insignias telling their own stories of service. They moved with the same quiet confidence, their presence commanding attention without a word. The leader faltered, his bravado slipping as he looked between the newcomers and the veteran. "Who the hell are they?" he muttered, glancing at his crew for backup. The veteran didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked to his brothers in arms, giving them a slight nod. They nodded back, their movements deliberate and synchronized, as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. "Just some friends of mine," the veteran finally said, his tone casual but carrying an unmistakable edge. The bikers shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence starting to crack. Even the onlookers seemed to feel the shift in energy, the weight of the moment growing heavier. The leader's grin had vanished, replaced by a scowl. "This isn't over," he said, trying to save face, but the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. The bikers shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence starting to crack. Even the onlookers seemed to feel the shift in energy, the weight of the moment growing heavier. The leader's grin had vanished, replaced by a scowl. "This isn't over," he said, trying to save face, but the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. The veteran's gaze didn't waver. "You're right," he said, his voice low but steady. "It's not." The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone watching knew they were seconds away from a breaking point. The leader of the bikers glanced nervously at the two men who had joined the veteran. They stood quietly, their expressions unreadable, but their presence impossible to ignore. The leader's earlier bravado was now a thin mask, barely holding up against the weight of the moment. His crew wasn't laughing anymore. Even the loudest of them had fallen silent, the gravity of the situation settling in. "All right," the leader said, forcing a smirk as he took a step back. "We don't want any trouble. Let's call it even." But his voice lacked conviction, and everyone could see it. He wasn't stepping down out of respect, he was trying to save face. The veteran didn't move. His calm gaze stayed locked on the leader, and his two friends didn't budge either. The silence was deafening. Then, breaking the tension, the veteran spoke. "You're walking away now," he said, his voice steady. "But remember this, there are some fights you won't win, no matter how many people you bring." For a moment, it seemed like the bikers would take the out and leave. But just as the leader turned to his bike, one of his crew, trying to prove himself, lunged forward, grabbing the veteran's shoulder. The move was impulsive, fueled by adrenaline and misplaced loyalty, but it was a mistake. Before anyone could react, the veteran shifted, his years of training taking over. With a quick, fluid motion, he twisted free and stepped back, putting the young biker off balance. He didn't throw a punch or escalate the situation, but his reaction was enough to send a clear message. This wasn't a man to mess with. The young biker froze, his eyes wide, and stumbled back toward his group. The leader glared at him, anger and embarrassment written all over his face. "We're done here," he snapped, motioning for his crew to leave. As the bikers rode off, the veteran watched them go, his expression unreadable. Just when the tension seemed to dissolve, one of his friends chuckled softly. "You've still got it," he said, clapping the veteran on the back. The veteran finally allowed himself a small smile. "They messed with the wrong guy," he said quietly. Then, with a glance at the lingering onlookers, he added, "Now, let's fill up and get moving. This show's over." But as he climbed back into his truck, a glint of something shiny caught his eye near the pump, a small knife one of the bikers had dropped. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. "Looks like they left something behind," he muttered, tucking it into his pocket as a reminder of the day they learned a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. As the bikers disappeared down the highway, the quiet of the gas station slowly returned. The onlookers, who had been frozen in place moments before, began to stir. Some exchanged quiet words, others simply shook their heads in disbelief, and a few gave the veteran a respectful nod before heading on their way. The veteran's two friends stayed by his side, their expressions calm but knowing. "You handled that well," one of them said, leaning against the truck. The veteran shrugged, his demeanor as steady as it had been throughout the ordeal. "Didn't have to do much." "They talked themselves out of it," he said with a small grin. The younger biker, the one who had hesitated earlier, lingered at the edge of the parking lot, separated from the others. He seemed unsure of himself, caught between loyalty to his group and the realization that he'd just witnessed something far beyond his experience. The veteran noticed him and gave a slight nod, not one of approval, but of acknowledgement. It was enough to make the young man straighten up and quietly walk away. The veteran turned to his friends. "Let's get back on the road," he said, tossing the dropped knife into the truck's glove box. "We've got better places to be." As they filled up their vehicles, the tension that had hung in the air seemed to dissolve completely. The veteran paid for his gas, sharing a quick word of thanks with the clerk, who was still wide-eyed from the encounter. By the time they pulled out at the station, the sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. As the miles rolled on, the veteran glanced at the knife again and shook his head with a quiet chuckle. Some lessons you can only teach the hard way, he said to himself, the road stretching out ahead, a reminder that no matter what, he'd always be ready for whatever came next.